cheap solar power, batteries, and electric vehicles are changing the transport and energy sector as we know. I bring in guests to this podcast who will help you with their ideas to navigate this energy transition. Thank you for joining.
Good afternoon, Tim. Great to see you.
Good afternoon. Great to be back. How are you going, sir?
I'm very good. Thank you. Yeah. I like the Aboriginal drawing in the background. Yes. Fantastic.
Yep.
Tell me what's happening in Australia. So many things we can hear.
Yeah, it is. We need to stay positive. I think you and I have talked about that in the past. And my vow at the start of this year was I'm only going to look north and west from Sydney. I'm going to ignore what's happening to the east, at least for the next 4 years or 3.5 years from now. But as you know, I'm an absolute bull on what's happening up in China. So we'll come to that later. I just was in China for a week with the New South Wales government, and we saw the third largest battery energy storage manufacturing company in the world, EV Energy. So it was always inspirational to go and talk to world-leading companies changing the world as we speak. But Australia's got some good positives. Like one of them, we just had a record high, 50.2% renewable energy penetration across the national electricity market in the month of November. So on average for the entire month was 50.2%. Now, we also haven't had any squeals that the grid's fallen over. More than 50% renewables and grid reliability is very good. So what we also saw, and it's maybe a little early to call this, but we saw a dramatic lower average wholesale electricity price, down about 28% year on year. And that followed last month, October, was another record high, 49.9% renewable energy penetration across the NEM. And now when I talk about the NEM, I'm talking about the national electricity market, which is the eastern states of Australia. It ignores Western Australia, that's another country. The Southwest Interconnect had a record high renewable energy penetration as well. So, and again, no squeals that the grid fell over. And by the way, more renewables means lower energy prices. So at the moment, obviously, energy prices for the last 3 years have been going up globally because of the invasion of Ukraine and the sanctions against Russia, exports of LNG and coal. And of course, fossil fuels have been the cause of hyperinflated energy prices for the last 3 years for everyone, including Australia. And so even though we've had the Murdoch media constantly telling us the higher renewables is why our energy prices are going up, that's obviously misinformation, disinformation. So beautiful to be able to say Australia's had a record high, 50.2% renewables for the entire month of November. And we're more than halfway to 82% renewables by 2030, which is going to be a big challenge, but it is the target for the federal government. Minister Bowen's been talking about that now for 4 years in a row. The Murdoch media every day says it can't happen, and we're more than halfway there, and the grid is stronger than ever. So I think and it's worth bearing in mind, sorry, I'm a numbers person. I'll throw numbers at you. You're a banker, you know that. We had about 6.2% curtailment in the grid in the month of November. So the number was 50.2. We have Australia now is the third largest installer of battery energy storage systems in the world, behind China and America. Per capita, we're number one in the world. And I mentioned batteries and curtailment in the same sentence because what we do know is if we install a huge amount of batteries, as we install a huge amount of batteries, we are going to dramatically, permanently reduce the grid curtailment. So 50 could very quickly become 53, for example, or not 56, because there'll always be some curtailment of the sun is running at all points in Australia on the national electricity market at the same time. There's some economic barriers to you just don't want to absorb all the solar. You're better off curtailing some of it, or it's in the wrong part of the grid. But at the end of the day, 6% curtailment, a lot of people point to that and go, oh, that's a waste. Well, there's free electricity anyway. It's the sun, it's the wind. But what it shows is as we build the batteries, as we build and connect the biggest batteries in the Southern Hemisphere, literally each and every week, which we just did that this week. We installed the biggest battery in the Southern Hemisphere down in Victoria. It should have been in my home state of New South Wales. It should have been up in Newcastle, but unfortunately their transformer blew up, unexpected electrical problem. And so the battery won't be fully commissioned. The Waratah Super battery won't be commissioned until next year. by the time it's commissioned, it was going to be the biggest battery in the world at the start of this year. It's a year behind schedule. I saw a post this morning saying there are 10 batteries operational in the world now that are all bigger than the Waratah big battery. 4 of them in Saudi Arabia, 3 of them in America, and 3 of them were in China. So it's amazing watching Saudi Arabia just go from being a petro state to be the biggest installer of batteries, or one of the 4 biggest battery installers in the world. And that's the beauty of renewable energy and batteries and electric vehicles and energy security. Not only do we save the planet, but we can actually manufacture these technologies at a speed and scale that is going to kill the fossil fuel industry, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Because 50% is a big number, considering what we have been told. The grid is going to fall apart if it exceeds 10, then become 20, then it become 30. And South Australia kept on proving, hang on, we can keep going up even more than 100%, right?
Yeah, they averaged 72% last month. So South Australia, you're dead right. Well, I've heard that repeatedly every year for a decade, 10%, then 15, then 20, then, but now we're at 50.2. But it's worth bearing in mind, when I talk about renewables in Australia, we consider hydro renewable. I have studied, India for a decade, renewables. Hydro is not that renewable when you've got monsoonal winds and monsoonal issues, and obviously all of the methane that comes out of, and plenty of risks. Let's not go down a deep hydro route. But when we talk about hydro in Australia, it was about 6% of that 50. So the variable renewable energy share was 44%. In South Australia, that 72 I mentioned is all the more amazing and world leading because it's 72% variable renewable energy penetration on average. There's no hydro, there's no coal in South Australia. There's bugger all interstate grid connectivity. And as we connect up more interstate connectivity, which is underway at the moment, that'll allow them to get, as you said, to 100% or more. And they've had days where they literally run the entire grid on rooftop solar. It's quite staggering. South Australia leads the world back. So we're at 44% for the month of November, variable renewable energy in the NEM, 72% in South Australia. And so South Australia leads the world. It shows what can really be done. And their target is to get 100% by 2020.
Yes. And it's just November. Summer is still not here yet, right? Wait until January, February, or even later part of December. So I'm sure that 50% number is going to be broken in the next couple of months that's coming, no? Because hundreds of thousands of batteries are getting installed every month now, right?
Well, 1,000 per day, or not hundreds of thousands. We've done 100.
That's 30,000 a month.
So since the 1st of July, so in 4.5 months, 5 months, 5.5 months now. Yeah, we're doing 1,000 batteries a day across Australia. There's a brilliant strategy by the federal government, so I'll give them a shout out. I'm pretty good at kicking government officials, but the federal treasurer, Jim Chalmers, has backed Minister Bowen, the Energy and Climate Minister, put $2.3 billion on the table to subsidise 30% of the capital cost of home battery systems up to 50 kilowatts. And it's been amazing. They modelled it at sort of 13 to 15 kilowatt hours as the average battery size that would be installed. We're now running at more than 20 kilowatt hours per battery. So it's double the size put at home, and the run rate is double the number that they're expecting. So it's been a standout success. And it's important to know, like some of the calls now are saying, we're going to run out of money. Chalmers is 2.3 billion will be fully depleted by the end of next year. But certain journalists have already leaked that there is a phase 2. So there's another 1.2 billion sitting behind that. So it's actually a 3.5 billion. So it's important we don't do fast too quickly and then run out of money and then cap the scheme and stop it. We might see the government cap it, maybe, I don't know, because there are some, we'll get to social equity issues in a minute. And Minister Bowen's come up with a really important social equity policy here. Because at the end of the day, if you can only access the 30% capital subsidy for a battery, if you have rooftop solar, you've got to own your own home. So it's a subsidy for the rich half of Australia. We'll come to the bottom half of Australia because they're the ones that will get the Albanese government re-elected, and they're the ones who most suffer from energy security. But for now, it's really important. This battery subsidy program is coming through. It's going well, and it's building capacity and showing we've had massive grid capital cost blowouts, greenfield grid transmission projects. taking twice as long as expected, costing 500% what they were originally budgeted to cost. And we just can't afford that, because if we gold plate the grid, that'll push up the price permanently for 50 years for the poorest people in Australia. And so I think the Australian energy market operator is real-time reality check saying, hang on, grid transmission costs have gone up 500%, battery costs have gone down 50%, solar costs have gone down 50%. How about we do a hell of a lot more distributed energy resources, home batteries, electric vehicles or batteries on wheels, rooftop solar, energy efficiency, and that way we can buy some time to get the grid construction, the grid transmission built, and not over gold plate the grid transmission. So that's a real test case underway right now, that you need to adjust to the economics, and the economics show consumer energy resources, distributed energy resources are the faster deployed, scalable, commercially viable assets. And so Australia is leading the world in that. We've led for a decade on rooftop solar. Now, on a per capita basis, we lead the world on battery deployments.
And this is exactly as you mentioned, the incentives changes behavior and the dynamics by creating a market. As an early adopter, I put a battery. I have a Tesla Powerwall 2. And then people say, why you put a battery in? It's only... No, the same people calling back saying, hey, which battery do I put in and when? And this rush and understanding, they have figured out the economics and solar. It's fantastic how the world has changed and how Australia is leading. I mean, back all the days when the Loy Yang A and Bs were coming in, there was no world beyond coal, right? Soon it will be 100% solar, most likely. And then as the largest per capita solar installation and the highest per capita battery installation, it's quite extraordinary, I think, no, the path that we are headed.
It is, and riffing on what you're saying there, the country that I think has surprised the world in the last 18 months, in a good way, is Pakistan. And
Yes.
you've seen that Pakistan did something like 15 gigawatts of rooftop solar last year, and they're on track to do another 15 gigawatts or more this year. And so I'm watching, as you say, March 2026 will be an all-time record high for solar in Pakistan. That's the best month of the year. Last March 2025, they hit a record high. 25% of all generation in the month of March was from solar. And that was not subsidized. That wasn't a government program. It was, we can't afford expensive, imported, dirty coal. So we're going to build our own rooftop solar. We're going to do it at massive speed and scale. And so they hit an all-time record high in the best month. The average for the year is probably only 18%, 20%. But in the month of March, it was the number one fuel source for Pakistan. And I'd be guessing they'll be at 35% in the month of March 2026. So just a profound story. And so we've actually just at Climate Energy Finance, my colleague Caroline Wang has just put out a report highlighting yet again China is leading the world when it comes to clean tech. They lead the world when it comes to clean tech R&D. They lead the world when it comes to clean tech manufacturing. They lead the world when it comes to clean tech domestic deployments. And they also lead the world when it comes to exports of clean technology. So solar modules are now dirt cheap, and they're bringing technology thanks to China, scaling it up, learning by doing, and crushing the price. And so countries like Pakistan are benefiting, and the world's benefiting. But the fifth one that China is now increasingly leading the world on is we've tracked over the last 3 years since the start of 2023, $180 billion of bound foreign direct investment by Chinese companies in the clean tech sectors globally. And the vast majority of that money has gone into the global south or to non-Anglo countries. So Saudi Arabia, I mean, they're not a global south, but they're massively pivoting. The Uzbekistans, the Spain.
I mean, Kazakhstan as well. Yeah.
Kazakhstan, Brazil, Chile, Malaysia, Laos, Turkey, Hungary, you name it, like literally every second country, most of Africa. So they're benefiting. Like Ember's now tracking the solar install rates in all the states, all the different countries of Africa, because they don't have the luxury of 24/7 power. But what they can do is afford very cheap, high quality solar modules. And so they're replicating the lesson that Pakistan's demonstrated. We're watching the uptake of EVs, Chinese EVs in Brazil and in Malaysia and in all Nepal hit 76% EV penetration this year. You go, Nepal, it's a poor country, but because it's a poor country, the government said, we want EVs because we can't afford expensive imported oil. What a beautiful lesson, mate. It's not Norway. What it's Norway doing, it's Nepal doing it. And it's China doing it. So beautiful seeing this global leadership that countries can build energy security even as they build decarbonisation and modernisation of their grids. So electrify everything, decarbonise, and realign all your political, geopolitical strategies to protect yourself from global trade wars by countries that used to be our allies.
Yeah, I mean, simple numbers. Earlier, we talked about numbers. Australian average consumption maybe 20 kilowatt hour a day or something because you're running aircon, you're running heating, depending on which part of the year you are in. But most of the developing Asia, basic needs are lighting and a bit of fan and a bit of television, charging mobile phone. It's less than a kilowatt hour when we think about it. Even if it's a 2 kilowatt hour, panel that size generates that in a day, just putting it outside in the sun. So it is unthinkable that we still have billions of people who do not have access to electricity, while this technology called solar is so cheap and sun is everywhere. Now, I mean, this is the bit that sort of amazes me that we still, when the big players, big companies, my former employer, the development banks of the world, the multilateral, still thinking what to do. Hey, give away a solar panel for free and a bit of cable, 12 volt, nobody's going to kill themselves. And 1 kilowatt hour battery is a tiny, this size thing. Just give it away. And like Pakistan, I mean, I interviewed someone and he was saying, you know how Pakistan did it? Somebody figured out and they were doing a TikTok. Someone else say, hey, I'll do this. I'll do a TikTok. Knowledge got shared. You don't need to write thick documents or present at the COP, right?
And you go in a couple of hours. But
12 volt, you can just do this like we used to do at high school, right? And just connect it up, right?
That's where we've talked about batteries a little bit, and batteries are a major part of the Australian strategy, but solar and batteries are it's just, and I don't actually go one step further, solar, rooftop solar, batteries and batteries on wheels really expedite this decarbonisation journey that we have to see. But what's pleasing me is that maybe because the Western world is more allied with America and China is trying to develop its own global relevance and position, China is working with non-traditional allies of America, and that's bringing capital and capacity and technology and energy independence and decarbonisation to countries as different as Turkey to Uzbekistan, as Malaysia through down to Brazil and so on, and even in Australia. So it's beautiful to see that technology. And actually, probably, I know I'm a China bull here, but what China is doing is actually exporting the factories. So they're building factories in Malaysia, in Saudi Arabia, in Spain, in Hungary, in Germany, in Brazil, in Australia. They just announced, Sunman just announced a factory in the Hunter Valley of New South Wales to build lightweight solar modules. So that's Dr. Xi from China, an Australian citizen, and he's now building a factory of 500 megawatt per annum. Very small, but by China standards. But what China's doing is exporting the manufacturing capacity. So like when you go to Turkey, they're Spain, they're building a €4 battery factory, and they're employing 5,000 Spanish workers, and they're supplying automotive companies in Europe. So therefore, they're getting around the trade barriers that China's dominating, China's dumping, China's exporting and destroying our industry. Now, all of a sudden, China is partnering with key partners around the world and building manufacturing and building high-value jobs in those countries and building a win for China, or a win for the recipient country, and a win for the planet. And it's beautiful to see. Now, part of that was to get around America's tariffs, because America originally put tariffs on China. So they built factories in Laos and Malaysia and Vietnam and Indonesia. But now they're realizing, because America has now put intermediate tariffs on all those countries to stop China getting around the rules. And then China's going, well, now that we built the factory, might as well serve the domestic market as well. Or let's go into Turkey. And then Turkey's got a free trade agreement with Europe. So Turkey can get 5,000 jobs. It can get high value manufacturing. It can service its own battery needs and can export EVs to Europe. And that to me is a win-win. So that is the silver lining of what's the debacle, the train wreck that's America, is that the world's re-examining geopolitical thinking and embracing opportunities. And energy security, energy independence is key to getting off our addiction, our global addiction to imported fossil fuels.
Yeah, I mean, in this space where China is doing all of those, also interesting to note, no, CSIRO invented Wi-Fi, and Professor Green, Martin Green, was one of the key players for the solar innovation, right?
He is a living Australian legend, and boy, he's changed the world. Dr. Xi was one
Yeah,
of
was a student at that time, yeah.
and now Dr. Xi's a world leader, a Chinese world leader. Fortunately, while claiming he's an Australian, he's Australian Chinese, and he's now building a factory back in Australia, into the world, and yeah, brilliant to see.
Yeah, I met him once here in the Philippines when I was with the Asian Development Bank, yes. Yeah, he's an amazing personality, and he actually commercialized, right? This took the tech, let's commercialize. Now, what's your view? I mean, yes, we are installing batteries 20 kilowatt hour, but we have a car that has a 65 kilowatt hour, maybe even larger batteries, right? What's your view on V2G? I mean, that's going to dramatically change many things because that battery is coming almost as a free when you buy a car.
Well, yeah, or you're buying a battery on the wheels.
Yes.
But not only does it give you energy independence, but it also gets you from A to B in style. And there is that risk, but at the end of the day, I think we need all of the solutions. We need all of them today. We need as many as we can get done. Like, this is going to be a journey for 15, 20 years. And the faster we do it, we're going to need all of that. So what we are seeing is electricity demand in Australia for the first time in 20 years is now growing again. We had 20 years where it flatlined. The economy was growing, per capita going down, as you're saying. But we're now starting to replicate the learnings of China. So China has been progressively electrifying everything because they were importing their LNG and their coal, and they didn't want their oil. They wanted to get off that. How do you get off imported oil? You electrify your transport. So there is an energy security angle there. There is an industry of the future. There is a save the planet thanks to China. There are all sorts of reasons to do it, but I think we need all of them. In Australia, vehicle to grid is coming, but it's not yet. The technology barrier, the regulatory barriers, the equipment, the enabling isn't quite here. It'll be another, I'll admit it, I'm going to buy, if I was going to buy a BYD, but maybe I'll buy a Pulsar, who knows? I'll buy a Chinese company car, no doubt, because they're the best technology in the world, and I couldn't think of driving a Tesla anymore. But what I'm waiting on, not only do I know the battery I'll buy next year will be 50% better than the battery I get from last year, but it'll be vehicle to grid enabled. At the moment, Australia is lagging. We haven't got the technology. We haven't enabled the EVs. And as you say, that makes it a no-brainer to have an EV. It's already a no-brainer, but once you get over the capital cost, but we can double the value of cars by actually being batteries on wheels. But in the meantime, Australia's got to decarbonise. We've got end-of-life coal-fired power plants, and they're going to break and close inevitably each and every year from now on for the next decade. That we've closed about 12 coal-fired power plants in the last 12 years. We'll close another 10, and we'll be down to the last one probably by 2035. The reason we won't close all of them is because we haven't deployed enough firm to renewable energy at speed and scale. So at the end of the day, I want batteries on wheels, but I want rooftop solar, and I want distributed energy and batteries, home batteries on batteries. Like Australia's building 10 of the biggest batteries in the world alongside Saudi Arabia and China and America. We need all of that because we are closing literally. Coal up until 2 months ago was the more than 50% of our monthly electricity generation. It's still 50, 60% of China. So as we electrify more, as we get more data centers, as we will get more electric vehicles, we stop importing expensive, high emissions oil, and we electrify. So we're going to need more power from the electricity grid. So I think we need all of them.
Yes, I mean, and then exactly as you mentioned, once you have the home batteries with the subsidies, more subsidies coming in, then we have the car batteries gets into the system. Slowly, our load factor goes up, right? So that within the same transmission capacity and distribution capacity, you can actually increase the gigawatt hour that is being sold, right? So we can also for a lot of those transmission and distribution investments in a big way as the power factor, the load factor increases. Load factor increases. So this is tremendous.
Yes, 100%. So it's about using the grid, the existing grid 24/7 or as near to 24/7, because otherwise it's like a bridge in peak hour. So
Yeah,
the
it's just a peak. That peak you're
building it for the peak, not for 24/7, but with batteries and with sensible demand response management and the right price signals, we can incentivize demand when electricity is cheap. And you can leverage the existing grid for 24/7, which means the more electricity you put through your grid, the existing grid, the lower the unit cost, which means we're then getting a very virtuous deflationary cycle. Whereas if we go on, Australia's got a very low population density. So I acknowledge China leads the world in renewable energy deployments. It leads the world in decarbonisation, but it's also got 1.4 billion people, and it's got one of the higher population densities in the world, like alongside India. I think Bangladesh is 3 times India, but at the end of the day, they've got a rich population. They've got a big industrial workload. So Australia, like when we look at EVs, China is at 50% new energy vehicle sales share of total sales. We're in Australia at 10, they're at 50%, but then they have fast chargers. They have the battery swapping. They have the density to actually support all of the fast charging rollout equipment that Australia, because we've got a low population density, lovely problem to have in many respects, but it means distributed energy resources have even more value for Australia because we have high demand in city of Sydney, city of Melbourne, city of Brisbane, but we've got a lot of people living in rural Queensland and it's very expensive getting electricity to them. The best thing we can do is accelerate VPPs, virtual microgrids, virtual power plants, batteries, and take them off the grid. And then everyone's a winner because they'll get better grid reliability. Their lines won't get cut every time there's a bushfire, but we also won't have the cost of servicing people, like 5 people sitting in the middle of nowhere in central Australia. They have every right to get energy, but let's give them rooftop solar and battery. Even if they have to have a diesel genset backup for use 1% of the time, it will still be a 99% lower emissions grid for them, and it'll be half the cost of what they currently pay. Well, sorry, we pay because we actually subsidise it as a universal service obligation to our regional folk.
And then if we break up the word rooftop solar into roof and solar, because what's happening in Germany with balcony solar, I mean, that's another potential, I think, in Australia, another 33 gigawatt hour of potential if you put on your fences. I have 11 kilowatt rooftop solar. I was calculating very easily if I put the fence. I know Australian law doesn't allow this. I mean, I was interviewing someone from Mongolia. He just put a proper fence, the picket fence. He just put solar. It's so cheap.
Yep.
And he sells back to the grid. I mean, so what's your view? I mean, that's something Australia has not touched yet, the balcony solar, no? That can give another 50 gigawatt, no?
Yeah, it can. So what we're talking about in Australia, as usual, the rich are fine to look after themselves and the poor just get screwed. So we have the highest rooftop solar penetration in the world, but if you rent, you're screwed because of the split incentive. The landlord owns the property. They're the ones who pay for the rooftop solar and you're the one that pays the electricity. Unless you can overcome that split incentive, you've got a real problem. If you live in an apartment, you've got a real problem. If you live in strata title, you've got a problem because you've got to get everyone in the strata over the line. So there has been some laws to say for solar, you only need a majority of people. For EV charging, you only need a majority in the strata. But what about all the apartments? Australia's population density is growing in our major cities, and all the people, and it's all of our younger generations who are the ones who are renting, who are in the apartments, who can't afford their own home. And so they're the ones who get it in the absolute net. And they're the ones who don't have the income to pay for it. So they're the ones suffering energy poverty. I can solve my problem. I just put rooftop solar and I'll put my battery and I can look after me. But what about the other half of the population? And so Minister Bowen has announced, I'm really excited by it, but there are some warts, so we can get into that. So he's announced that for the default market offer, you can go and negotiate your whatever retail tariff you want with your retailer. There's all sorts of tariffs. If you don't have the knowledge and the confidence, you can just get onto the default market offer set by the Australian Energy Regulator on behalf of the average person in the street. Now, everyone should renegotiate in Australia your power tariff every year. because you can get well below the default market offer. But the default market offer is there to protect those people that don't have the education, the patience, the time to actually protect themselves. It's the regulator protecting them. So what Minister Bowen has said in New South Wales, South Australia and Queensland, who have the default market offer ruling federally, in those 3 states, then you will allowed to sign up for a tariff that gives you 3 hours of free solar electricity every day from 11 o'clock to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You will know exactly when it is, 11 till 2, free power, as much as you can use, and you don't have to have rooftop solar. So it means that if you are sitting renting, the bastard next door owns his own home and he's got big rooftop solar, he's got the benefit of rooftops. All of a sudden, you're lucky you haven't spent a cent and you're getting access to their free solar for 3 hours a day. Now, that to me is it's really sensible, because we've got to protect the bottom half of Australia. We've got to protect the bottom half of the world. We've got to make sure that this is, to me, a great way of socializing the benefits of rooftop solar in Australia, because we do have a problem. We've got a situation where when it's sunny in Sydney, it's also sunny in Brisbane, it's maybe sunny in Melbourne. So the solar is all aligned. It's 8 hours of the day when it's sunny in the NEM. We're not connected to Western Australia, and we never will be, in my view. So you've got a problem. My solar is producing when everyone else's solar is producing. So therefore, my feed-in tariff to the grid should be zero. There is no real value. The power price in Australia, for 20% of the time, is negative, the wholesale power price. But the retail consumer take advantage of that. So what Minister Bowen has said is the power price is negative. How do we leverage low cost or negative energy? Give it to the people that want it. So that'll be the default market offer. You can opt in and get 3 hours of free electricity from your retailer, and effectively you be the solar sponge for everyone else's solar. And at the moment, otherwise we have a situation where the power price is, and AEMO, the Australian Energy Market Operator, is worrying about minimum on-grid demand. They're worrying about how they maintain minimum grid stability, not maximum grid demand, minimum, because I've got my solar. When my solar is pumping, everyone else is pumping, and I'm using all my own and then exporting my surplus into a market that doesn't exist. So we've got a price-only market. The price goes negative. So Minister Bowen is trying to change behaviour and protect and serve the people most vulnerable to energy poverty. And I think it's a brilliant strategy, because it'll also say to them, look, you turn your air conditioner on at 11 o'clock, it's not going to cost you a cent. And by 2 o'clock, your house will be cooled down, middle of summer, it's hot, you need air conditioning in Australia. If you're privileged enough to have an aircon, you can turn it on, run it for 3 hours. Now, the problem is a lot of our housing stock is really bad quality. So it'll highlight the next problem, which is that we need to insulate our housing stock. And usually the worst housing stock is in the poor people's houses. So we then mandate insulation, we mandate double glazing of windows. Europe's been doing that for 20 years. Australia, we don't do it. So we need to stop living in dens. We need better thermal building insulation properties. But having rooftop solar means you can have free electricity. You can turn your air conditioner on, you can run your dishwasher, you can run your washing machine, you can run your pool pump, and you can use as much electricity as you can. You can charge your EV, charge your battery for that 3 hours. It's all about trying to change behavior so that we pull demand to when power is plentiful and cheap. And that is, to me, not only a vote winner, it's a no-brainer for mobilizing social license to operate for renewables, which, of course, the Murdoch media is always attacking fossil fuels in Australia because they don't want, attacking renewable energy because they're serving the fossil fuel puppet masters that run our country. And so the Murdoch media is attacking renewables. This is a great way of saying, well, hang on, renewables are giving me free power for 3 hours a day. I'm sitting in luxury and it's 40 degrees temperature outside. Well, thank God my neighbour's got rooftop solar. And then that, to me, builds the social license, builds the momentum so that we can get to not just 82% renewables by 2030, we can then aim for more than 90% by 2035, and we can follow China and Japan and electrify everything progressively and get off our $50 billion a year of imported oil addiction, oil and diesel addiction, we can bring all of that money back into our economy and everyone's bills. So people like Rewiring Australia have said Australian households spend about $5,000 a year on energy, electricity, methane gas, number one, oil or petrol or diesel. $5,000 a year. You could probably halve that. Grattan Institute has modelled that the average Australian household by 2050 will be paying 50% less for their total energy bill. They'll be paying about $2,500 a year. And that's because you cut $2,000 or $3,000 off your petrol bill a year. You cut your gas, you go 100% electrical. And then you'll be still paying for electricity, or you'll be paying for the interest for your rooftop solar and your battery, and it'll be going to your bank rather than your electricity provider. And effectively, you'll then have a negative power price because you'll be exporting the surplus, because everyone will have 10 or 15 kilowatts of solar on every house, hopefully all the rental houses as well. And therefore, we actually accelerate electrification, we accelerate insulation and energy efficiency, thermal efficiency, and we accelerate distributed energy resources and batteries on wheels. And so we half the price of energy spend in Australia in a 25-year view. That's a brilliant vision. And so I think what Minister Bowen is doing is all about social license. There are some negative implications, economic implications, but at the end of the day, I really like the strategy. It's about how do we help the bottom half of Australia, those most struggling with energy poverty, cost of living poverty, feeding their children, educating their children, and just paying their bills, rather than letting the rich, as usual, benefit and the poor carry the cost.
I mean, yeah, you can look at it from that perspective, just purely from system planning perspective. If you could look at the load duration curve, and I can chop off those few hours in the year or few hundred hours in the year where we need everybody on board, okay, that's gone. If we can flatten the load curve, and here it's a fantastic opportunity. It's basically saying we have an off-peak tariff where we do charge you 50% more peak time, give you 50% discount during off-peak. And here it's a smart thing is saying we won't charge you at all because marginal cost of that solar is zero. And something free is so much more powerful than whatever cents you want to charge. And I think this policy will be copied globally. I can see that happening because this is the smartest way of shifting demand. Because yes, of course, we can shift demand by storing in the battery. But if you can move that demand, hey, I mean, we all have done, put your dryer on a timer, washing machine on timer, so that whenever the free electricity is coming, you're sort of like a slab heating in winter, just get everything on.
Let's not forget hot water. We need all our hot water at night.
Yeah, hot water. I mean, those who want to heat the pool, your EV charging, you name it, you can put on a timer, everything except potentially lights, right?
And
it's
lights
fantastic.
are tiny as a percent of your total power bill. They're tiny.
It's very tiny. Yeah.
Exactly. So you just incentivize behavior change. So it's more, at the end of the day, the economics of rooftop solar are a bit of a no-brainer. So effectively, we need people to think, I've got rooftop solar. If I just export it for free, good. I'm helping my neighbours. I'm helping my children or someone else's children, helping those that are renters. And so I'm happy to give away my solar. At the end of the day, it doesn't cost me anything. Once I've built my system, it's just surplus energy. But if we're building social license and we're creating, as you saying, not so much flattening of the curve, we're actually bringing the demand into when the power...
No, I mean, you increase the load factor by
getting rid of the duck curve.
And then for the apartment dwellers, you may not have the ability to put a solar, you're a tenant, but you can always put a 10 kilowatt hour battery somewhere and use free electricity to fill it up so that you can use it later in the day, right?
Which is something else. I'll pick you up on that. You can't in Australia access
right now
subsidy right now. And I'm not sure why Minister Bowen's done that. Now, maybe he has his logic and maybe he'll do that as a change to the policy, but you can only get a battery subsidy from the federal government if you've got rooftop solar coming or already installed. So you can't do what you're saying with apartments, but there's no reason why we shouldn't do that. In fact, they would be huge beneficiaries. You literally set your battery at a smart battery. You just charge it, you plug it in, you go to work, come home and it's fully charged. It's been fully charged between 11 o'clock and 2 o'clock. Now, what we'll then find is we'll have too much demand in the middle of the day and power prices won't be negative. Well, great. We'll just double the amount of rooftop solar, because I have AEMO about 4 years ago modeled that Australia would have about 100 gigawatts of rooftop solar capacity by 2050. And I kept saying to AEMO, you're wrong. The number's right, but the decade is out by 1 decade. It will happen by 2040. Now,
Well, even earlier, if you allow balcony solar or sort of fencing solar everywhere, right?
balcony solar, if we do every school in Australia. So I was just talking to Parents for Climate today. They're doing a policy. Every school in Australia should have solar. Now, the problem with that is what happens when on the weekend, on the 10 weeks of the year that the schools are shut, they're not using the power. But at the end of the day, let's make sure everyone's a beneficiary. Let's create the demand pool, or let's give them a battery and rooftop solar so they can sell the battery and have it connected to a virtual power plant or to your retail and has the right to use your battery. So you get paid to actually use your rooftop solar, transform it into the evening peak and sell it at maximum prices. So we do peak load shading. So not only are we addressing the minimum on-grid demand, we're addressing the maximum on-grid demand, and that's the real killer. It's the building extra lane on the Harbour Bridge that'll cost you an absolute arm and leg. If you can just move the demand 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours into the middle of the day when electricity is free, everyone benefits. And so the idea we need to be able to get through is to stop the Murdoch media saying renewables are causing your power prices to go up. They're not. More renewables is the way you get your power prices permanently, change the way I work, your energy bills permanently down. And Grattan Institute says they'll halve by 2050. I want them to halve by 2040 because I want the government to actually really enable that. And so that's why, part of why I'm advocating what Minister Bowen is doing. He's got sensible policy. He is employing every electrician in Australia. I want every electrician to have 1 or 2 apprentices so that we can do twice as much rooftop solar and twice as much batteries. And we've got all the capacity to roll out fast chargers, slow chargers, home chargers for our batteries on wheels. And then hopefully people will realize, get off the gas. So we have a gas substitution roadmap, and then we start insulating our housing. We start having 7-star neighbours ratings. We start having awnings. We start to have proper design, and we make sure all houses are held to that, not just for the rich people. It's the poor people who get high quality housing, thermal insulation, and they get to benefit for. But if they've got a well thermally insulated property, can air condition it from 11 in the morning till 2 in the afternoon for free, and then that, because of good insulation, will carry through into the evening, so they actually don't need to turn their aircon again, and that will get, hopefully, Minister Bowen and Albanese re-elected, and they'll double down and do it again. And then they'll do it on the schools, they'll do it on the hospitals, they'll do it on every community building, every local council building, and then they'll work out in every strata building, every warehouse in Australia. And then, as you say, Australia will lead the world, and then we can help do that across the Pacific, Asia Pacific, and China's already doing it. We know China leads the world when it comes to distributed solar deployments. We talk about Australia being a leader. China does, I think 40% of all of China's solar installs are actually distributed solar.
Yep. And then I actually like to disagree a bit on the insulation side of it, because, putting a battery, 20 kilowatt hour battery, should not cost more than $1,500 in the house. And battery can be another white good. So I see a world where if electricity is free, and it will be continuing, because the fundamental reason why there's electricity free being announced is not going to change. So what happens then? You have a, say, 25 kilowatt hour battery, which is another white good, given by a company X under the condition saying, hey, you can use half the kilowatt hour, but the remaining half, I'll take it out and meet the system demand in the evening. I'm sure the numbers will work out. Then the half that you have, that may be cheaper option, because solar is free, than trying to stop the electricity that's going to go out through your window as a loss. Someone needs to do those numbers, because insulation is expensive. If genset is free, come on.
At the end of the day, you've got to depreciate the battery. You've got to finance. And you mentioned a price, but the price is 10 times where it is today. It's 10 times the number you're thinking. Aspirational, but at the end of it, we need all of this. Like at the end of the day, 80% of the energy used in Australia is from fossil fuels.
Yeah.
80% electricity penetration. So we've got a long way to go. We need insulation, we need batteries, we need rooftop solar, we need batteries on wheels, and then we need to do it again and again. And we need everyone to do this, and we need to change all the appliances. We need ground heat pumps. We need all of these solutions. And then we can finance how much do we gold plate the houses? Maybe 7-star houses is a bit too far. I don't think it'll prove that way. I look at, like, you only have to walk around Europe, you see triple glazing. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, but they get freezing cold temperature, of course. Yes, of course.
Yeah, they're dealing with freezing cold, but climate change, we're going to have regular days of 40-degree heat. Like India regularly in Delhi has 50-degree heat. We're now talking about the northern parts of North Africa being uninhabitable. We've got to deal with extreme weather. Extreme weather is both cold and hot. And at the end of the day, I would love to see Australia's housing stock go from the average 2-star rating to 5 or 6. Does it all have to be 7 or 8? Like I don't like air conditioning. I don't like turning out like fresh air. I like being able to open the window. I want the 4 days of the year. It'll soon become 10 days a year. You have to have aircon. So, and then no point air conditioning a house that has massive drafts, massive holes and no insulation. And like my house has beautiful windows looking out over the national park. I rue every day that no one put double glazing in when they built the house 30 years ago.
Where are you in Melbourne?
Sydney. So I'm on the Ku-ring-gai National Park. I have literally kangaroos eating my back lawn. I don't bother planting anything because they just eat every night. So I've got a natural backyard, and it just literally, there isn't a fence. It just goes straight into the national park. So I hear this thumping outside my window in the middle of the night. The kangaroo eating. Sometimes I'm doing work in my office. I'm looking out over the street. This huge bloody wallaby, not wallabies, they're kangaroos. It's an enormous city in my front yard. It's just beautiful. It's amazing being like the biggest city in Australia, and you've got the wildlife here at the front door. We are blessed in Australia.
Amazing.
We need to protect it, and we need to serve it, and we need to value it. And so bring on rooftop solar, bring on battery, bring on electric vehicle, bring on a $50 billion a year cut to our imported fossil fuel bill a year for Australia. And let's bring all of those jobs into Australia and electrify everything, decarbonize it. And let's hope for your aspiration, maybe marginally zero priced energy for everyone, but we don't want extravagance, and we need to actually get to a livable planet first. I think you and I agree on that.
Thank you so much for your time. Anything else you want to highlight? We have not touched AI and robotics. That would be another long discussion, but maybe we do that another time. Anything else you want to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, probably negative on free rooftop solar. So we were meant to I should drag you down a whole lot of different rabbit holes. There's so many different aspects to the energy system, and it's happening at a brilliant speed of knots, and it's happening led in China speed, China scale. But when we think about the 3-hour rooftop solar, the biggest risk I've seen is that it undermines the case for other people to put rooftop solar on. Right? If I'm doing the maths and I know I can get free electricity from 11 till 2, that's going to cut the productivity of me. If I'm doing a spreadsheet analysis and saying, I want to put rooftop solar on my house, I'm getting free electricity for 3 hours of the 8 hours it's generating. Why would I bother? And that was the point Tristan Edis at Green Energy Markets had made very clear. Now, Tristan is the key modeler of rooftop solar for the Australian energy market operators. So shout out to his experience and his work. But he was really worried when Minister Bowen brought in his home battery subsidy program. We saw solar installs in Australia in June, July, August drop by 20+% year on year. Now, fortunately, we just got the November number and it was virtually back to the 5-year average. So we're probably going to be down about 10-12% for the year of rooftop solar installs. So we did 3.1 gigawatts last year. We'll probably do 2.8 gigs this year. But Tristan, for the last 5 years, has been forecasting that number eventually would get to 2 gigs a year. And we're still 5 years later at 2.8. Why was he saying that? Because ultimately things will reach saturation. I think he'd underestimated how much cheap solar would expand the ready market. Hence why my number is 100 gigawatts by 2040. It's actually Tristan's number of 100 gigs by 2050. But I think we need to be aware that it does undermine the economics of rooftop solar. But as you and I discussed here, my rooftop solar charges my battery, and the battery is what's going to do my peak shaving of my energy in the evening peak. But I did just have an electrician last 2 months ago quote to build a system for me. He came back with a 7 kilowatt solar system and 30 kilowatt battery. Now, I was thinking 10 to 15 kilowatts rooftop solar. And he goes, yeah, but you don't use much electricity. You're better off actually time shifting the solar into the evening peak. And so the battery is more valuable, and that's where you get the big subsidy. But I've got a big roof. It should have 10 kilowatts or 15 kilowatts. And by the way, it only cost me an extra $1,000 anyway. But he said the economics, 7 kilowatts for the solar. So what we want to do is get to installing as much distributed solar as we can. We don't want the economics eroded so badly that people don't bother and they just go with the battery. And I think that's where Minister Bowen's tied the battery and only to rooftop solar, because the batteries mean if I've got rooftop solar, I cut my on-grid demand by about 50% over the year. If I get my battery, I cut my on-grid demand by 90+%. If I then go and install a battery, which is what I'm about to do, I'll actually be exporting 20 or 30% of the time. So I'll be a generator. I won't buy any electricity from the grid, and I will supply electricity to when other people need it, when they pay the most for it. So yeah, I think we've just got to be aware. We don't want to erode the economics of rooftop solar too much, but at the end of the day, it's a no-brainer. We're talking about we'll move it from a 5-year payback to a 6-year payback. The system's going to last for 25 years. Anyone who's rich enough to own their own home is not going to care about a 5 or 6 year payback. It's a no-brainer. They'll just do it, and they'll do it when they're doing their battery.
Yeah, there is another dimension to it. I mean, also so many houses gets sold and bought each year, right? And every time you are selling a house, I mean, I found an article, somebody said that adding your house, sort of solar to your house adds significant amount to the property
Capital
value.
gains.
So people will do it for other reasons, because early adopters already got rooftop solars, and then the others who will do because just to get to the right price for the house.
Absolutely. The battery will enhance the value. The fast charger in the garage or the slow charger in the garage will enhance the value. Absolutely. And that's partly why I want the star rating system in Australia. We've got a obscene $12 trillion of capital tied up in our housing stock.
Yep.
I want all of the banks and all the investors and all the homeowners to know what their star rating on their house is. To get to your point, if I try and sell my house at the moment and have about a 2-star rating, like it's a really old house, it's the shittiest house in the street, in the suburb. Part of why I don't have rooftop solar, I only moved in 2 years ago. I don't figure someone's going to knock it down and build a mansion on it when I leave. But what I want to know is that if I make this a 5-star, I'm going to get a 10% higher price for my property. And therefore, I'm going to be able to go to my bank and say, look, if I upgrade from a 2 to a 5-star, it's going to cost me $30,000. Combank, will you lend me $30,000? And they go, absolutely, yes, it's secured against your property. And I know when you sell it, your house will be worth 10% more. And then they'll say, how about you take 40,000, go from 2-star to 6-star? And because they'll know that a 6-star house is worth 5% more than a 5-star house. I want them to have that hard confidence on the data. So had been advocating for the federal government to bring in a national neighbours star rating on every house at the point of sale, at the point of rental. So that way we get around the split incentive. Because if the landlord knows the value of his property goes up because he's got a 6-star house, he'll do the right thing for his tenant.
Yes,
not because he cares about his tenant, he cares about his hip pocket. We need to incentivize those with money to do the right thing and look after the other half of the country. And that's where I like the idea of double glazing. If, by the way, the cost of double glazing would halve if we had a massive demand pool. If we were retrofitting every window in Australia over the next 20 years, every time we do a new build, we had double star. Bunnings had double glazing, triple glazing as standard stock, then the price would go down by 50%. The builders would all know about it. And anyone that's in Germany or Poland's got triple glazing everywhere because of the very cold weather in winter. It's just amazing. You don't need your aircon on because you actually don't feel the temperature from outside. It's just, and the noise insulation and the quality of life. So There are all sorts of reasons, but I want to unlock that capital value of the $12 trillion we've got in housing. How do we mobilize that where the average star rating moves from, say, 2 to 3 to 6 or 7, and that will actually reduce energy demand another 20, 30, 40%. And the best form of energy is the energy efficiency, the energy you don't use.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your time, Tim. And I think we need to have another discussion on the free electricity. I'm sure there'll be different perspective, but I'll connect you on that. Thank you again.
Great. Lovely talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Energypreneurs. To continue listening to this conversation, please visit us at Energypreneurs. Thank you. See you next time.